I'm facing a shocking family betrayal. Despite kicking me out of their home due to lack of space, my entitled family now expects me to hand over my own house to my brother. I knew something was up the minute I got a text from my mom at 3 a.m. Now, my family isn't what you'd call considerate or caring. In fact, they pretty much go out of their way to not communicate with me unless they need something. So when my phone buzzed in the middle of the night with a "you awake" message from her, I knew deep in my bones that this wasn't going to be a chat about the weather. I texted back, half dreading what she was going to say. Her response: "We need to talk. It's about the house." Great. Of course it was about the house. That house has been the cause of more drama in my life than I ever could have predicted. And the irony of this situation: this is the same family that kicked me out of their home years ago because they didn't have space for me. But now, here they were, trying to take my house away. But let me rewind. This is a story that goes back years, long before the midnight texts and legal threats. It's a tale of family entitlement, golden child favoritism, and just how far some people will go to get something they think they deserve. Buckle up, it's a wild ride. It all started when I was 19, fresh out of high school, unsure of what I wanted to do with my life, and like most teenagers, still living with my parents. At the time, my family consisted of me, my parents, and my older brother Jake, the golden child. Now, when I say Jake was the golden child, I don't mean in the usual, "oh, he's mom and dad's favorite" kind of way. No, Jake was everything to them. He could do no wrong. He was the star athlete, the straight-A student, the one with the charming smile and the bright future. Me? I was the awkward kid with the second-hand clothes, the C-average grades, and the bad habit of speaking my mind. Needless to say, I didn't exactly fit the mold of what my parents wanted in a child, and it showed. When Jake turned 23, he was still living at home, enjoying rent-free living while working a cushy job at the family business. My parents were perfectly fine with him staying forever, it seemed, but when I hit 19, things changed. I remember the day vividly. I came home from work, exhausted after a 10-hour shift at a local fast food place, and found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for me. "We need to talk," she said, with that same tone she used when I'd done something wrong. I braced myself. "Your dad and I have been thinking, we don't really have the space for you anymore." Now keep in mind, this is a F5-bedroom house. My room was tiny and I barely took up any space. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Well," she continued, "Jake needs more room. He's been talking about starting his own business, and he needs an office space." Jake. Of course, it was always about Jake. "So, where am I supposed to go?" I asked, feeling the pit in my stomach grow. My mom shrugged. "You'll figure something out. You're 19 now. It's time to be independent." That was it. No offer to help, no plan, just a "you'll figure something out." They basically kicked me out so Jake could have an office. I scrambled to find a place. I didn't have enough saved up for a proper apartment, so I bounced between friends' couches for months. Eventually, I found a cheap, run-down studio that smelled like mold and desperation, but it was something. Meanwhile, Jake thrived. His business never really took off, but it didn't matter. He stayed at home, mooched off my parents, and continued living the golden life while I scraped together what little I had to pay rent and eat. I struggled, but I got by. Over the years I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at a time to make ends meet. And my parents? They barely called. They were too busy helping Jake achieve his dreams. I'll admit, resentment built up. But I kept my distance. I didn't need them, and I was determined to prove it. Then, out of nowhere, something incredible happened. A few years later, when I was 26, I received a call that would change everything. My Aunt Carol, my dad's estranged sister, had passed away. Now, I didn't know Aunt Carol well. She was the black sheep of the family, living in a different state and only coming around for a few holidays when I was younger. But unlike my parents, Aunt Carol had always been kind to me. She never treated me like the family screw-up. In fact, during the few times we spent together, she always encouraged me to follow my own path, regardless of what others thought. So, when I found out she'd passed, I was sad, but also curious. We hadn't spoken in years, but I'd always had this strange connection to her. That connection became even stranger when, 2 weeks after her passing, I got a letter from her lawyer. Aunt Carol had left me her house. I was stunned, completely floored. How could this even be real? I wasn't particularly close with her, yet here she was, leaving me a whole house in her will. And it wasn't just any house, it was a cozy 3-bedroom, 2-bath place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but compared to my moldy studio, it was a palace. The house was mine, all mine. When I told my family about the house, I expected, I don't know, maybe a little surprise or even happiness for me. But no, what I got was the exact opposite. Their reactions ranged from shocked silence to outright indignation. My mom's first words were, "That's surprising," and my dad grumbled something about Aunt Carol never being quite right in the head. Jake? Oh, Jake was livid. You could see it in his eyes. I remember him muttering, "It doesn't make sense. Why would she leave it to you?" Because I'm not a self-centered jerk, I wanted to say, but I kept my mouth shut. It didn't take long for the family's attitude to change from passive-aggressive confusion to outright entitlement. Within days of finding out about the house, my parents were already dropping hints. "You know, Jake and Emily are going to need more space with the baby coming," my mom said during one of her rare phone calls. I nodded, unsure of where she was going with this. "Well," she continued, "it'd be nice if you could, let them live in the house. At least for a little while. I mean, do you really need all that space to yourself?" There it was, the not-so-subtle hint. At first it was all subtle, little comments here and there. My dad would call me and ask if I'd thought about Jake's situation. My mom would send me texts like, "It'd be so much easier for Jake and Emily if they didn't have to worry about rent right now." Even Emily got in on it, messaging me about how wonderful it would be to raise their baby in a proper house instead of their cramped apartment. But I wasn't falling for it. I knew what they were doing, and there was no way I was going to let them manipulate me. I'd worked hard to survive on my own, and now that I finally had a place to call my own, they wanted to take it away from me. No chance. Then came the day of the intervention. It was a Saturday afternoon when my parents invited me over for dinner. "Just a nice family meal," they said. "It'll be fun," they said. I should have known better. The minute I walked into their house, I could tell something was off. Jake and Emily were already there, seated at the dining table with smug looks on their faces. My parents were in the kitchen, whispering to each other. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, nothing," my mom said with a forced smile. "We just thought it'd be nice to have a little family chat. About the future." The future? Alarms started going off in my head. I sat down, bracing myself for whatever was coming. Sure enough, as soon as dinner was served, my dad cleared his throat and launched into what can only be described as the most transparent guilt trip I've ever experienced. "Look, let's get straight to the point," Dad began, putting his fork down like he was about to have the most serious conversation of his life. "We've been talking, and we just think that you need to reconsider how you're using Aunt Carol's house. It's not right for one person to have all that space." Here it was. They weren't even trying to sugarcoat it anymore. They wanted my house, plain and simple. "Jake's starting a family," my mom chimed in, as if I hadn't heard her say this exact line a million times before. "And he needs more space than you do. We're all family, and family looks out for each other." I glanced at Jake and Emily, who were watching the scene unfold with smug satisfaction. Jake had his arm around Emily, who was absent-mindedly rubbing her pregnant belly, as if to underscore just how much more deserving they were of my house. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. "I'm not giving up the house, it's mine. Aunt Carol left it to me for a reason." Jake, clearly fed up with the back and forth, jumped in. "She left it to you because she didn't know the whole situation. If she had known that we were about to have a second kid, I'm sure she would have changed her mind. You don't even need a whole house. You're just being selfish." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same brother who'd lived rent-free for nearly a decade, who had never worked a hard job in his life. And now he had the audacity to call me selfish. "Oh, I'm being selfish?" I asked, my voice rising. "You're the one demanding that I give up my house just because you're having another baby. Did you forget that I spent years homeless because you needed a home gym? Or that I've been working non-stop just to stay afloat while you've had everything handed to you?" The tension at the table skyrocketed. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, clearly not expecting me to fight back so hard. Jake's face turned red, and Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not used to anyone standing up to her golden husband. "You're twisting everything," my mom said, trying to take control of the situation. "It's not about what happened in the past. It's about what's best for the family. And right now, Jake's family needs that house more than you do." At this point, I was shaking with anger. I'd been the scapegoat for years, always expected to give up whatever scraps I had for the sake of the family. And now they were asking for the one good thing that had ever happened to me. "I'm not giving you the house," I said firmly, standing up from the table. "And if you try to take it from me, you'll regret it." I walked out, leaving them stunned and silent behind me. I thought that would be the end of it. After all, I'd made my stance crystal clear. I wasn't giving up my house, and they could guilt-trip me all they wanted. It wasn't going to work. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks after that disastrous dinner, I received a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was just junk, but then I saw the name of the law firm on the envelope. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I opened it and started reading. My parents had actually hired a lawyer to contest Aunt Carol's will. They were trying to claim that the house should have gone to Jake, and that Aunt Carol had been mentally unfit when she made her decision. Their lawyer had filed a petition to challenge the validity of her will, and they were demanding that I either give up the house or face a court battle. I couldn't believe it. They were actually willing to take me to court over a house that had nothing to do with them. I didn't even know where to start processing this. I mean, who does that to their own child? I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. I knew my family wasn't perfect, but to go this far? It was like they didn't even care about me anymore, just Jake, as usual. But I wasn't about to let them win. If they thought they could scare me into handing over the house, they were sorely mistaken. I hired my own lawyer and prepared for the fight of my life. The next few months were some of the most stressful of my life. My lawyer assured me that my parents' case was weak at best, but that didn't stop them from dragging me through the mud. They went to family members, neighbors, and anyone who would listen, spreading lies about how I had manipulated Aunt Carol into giving me the house. Every day I was bombarded with calls and messages from relatives, some of whom I hadn't spoken to in years. They called me greedy, selfish, ungrateful, you name it. And all of them seemed to think that Jake was somehow entitled to my house just because he had kids on the way. But I stood my ground. I had the will, I had Aunt Carol's written instructions, and most importantly, I had the truth on my side. There was no way I was going to let them steal what was rightfully mine. Then came the day of the court hearing. My parents showed up with Jake and Emily in tow, looking smug and confident, as if they'd already won. But as soon as the proceedings started, it became clear that their case was falling apart. The judge listened patiently as their lawyer rambled on about family obligations and moral duty. But when it came time to present actual evidence, they had nothing. Aunt Carol's will was airtight, and there was no proof that she had been mentally unfit when she made it. My lawyer calmly laid out all the facts, and within an hour, the judge dismissed their case entirely. It was over, they had lost. You'd think the story would end there. But life has a funny way of dealing out justice, and in this case, karma wasn't done with them yet. After they lost the case, my parents were furious. They stopped talking to me completely, and Jake and Emily moved across the country to start fresh. I thought that would be the last I'd hear from them for a while, but life had other plans. A few months after the court case, I got a message from Jake. He and Emily were struggling financially. Their move hadn't gone as planned, Jake's business was failing again, and they were drowning in debt. They had run out of options, and as a last resort, they were reaching out to me, the same person they had tried to rob. Jake's message was desperate. He said they were on the verge of losing everything, and asked if they could move into my house just temporarily while they got back on their feet. I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. After everything they'd put me through, after months of trying to take my house and ruin my life, now they were coming to me for help? I'll admit, I thought about it for a while. Part of me wanted to rub it in their faces, to throw their desperation back at them and say, "No way, you're on your own." But then I remembered something Aunt Carol had told me once: don't let bitterness control your life. You're stronger than that. So, I offered them a deal. They could stay in one of the guest rooms for a reasonable rent, and they would have to follow my rules, no exceptions. Jake and Emily, clearly out of options, accepted. They moved in a week later. So, here we are. Jake and Emily are living in my house paying rent to me while I live comfortably in the master bedroom. It's ironic, really. They spent months trying to take my house, and now they're tenants in it. And as for my parents? We barely speak anymore. The whole ordeal strained our relationship beyond repair, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I finally learned that just because someone is family doesn't mean they have a right to walk all over you. In the end, Aunt Carol's gift wasn't just the house. It was the realization that I could stand up for myself, that I didn't need to bend to my family's ridiculous demands anymore. So, to anyone out there with an entitled family trying to guilt trip you into giving them something that's yours, stand your ground. You don't owe them anything, and if they try to take you to court, well, at least you'll have a good story to tell.